Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me okay in the back? Very good. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to the University of Virginia's Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. My name is Gerald Warburg. I teach classes on national security policy and legislative strategy here at the Batten School. I'm joined by my fellow moderator, Associate Dean, and Professor Craig Volden. It is indeed an honor tonight to host candidates for election of our representative to the next United States Congress. Tonight's debate continues a Batten School tradition of promoting civil discourse on the challenging issues of our times. Its roots are in the very first House election debates held in these parts, when James Madison and James Monroe squared off for this very seat. Spoiler alert, Mr. Madison won. This is in a district, it is said, that was artfully gerrymandered by then Governor Patrick Henry. In recent years, this room has hosted controversial speakers with diverse points of view. They range from Madeleine Albright and Eric Cantor, Tim Kaine and Corey Stewart, Robert McDonnell and Terry McAuliffe, to Tom Garrett, Robert Mueller, and John Lewis. Professor Volden will review the ground rules that the candidates have agreed to momentarily. Let me just state first for our television and online viewers that audience tickets were distributed through a nonpartisan online process. We have made every possible effort to ensure that a fair and frank discussion ensues, and yes, a genuine debate, solely guided by citizens' concerns, no one else's agenda. Seating has been limited only by public safety and the fire marshal. What we ask of you, the live audience members, is simply this, what my late mother, Sandal Stoddard, simply called good manners. We've all seen enough shouting matches in the committees of Congress and on cable TV. We just do not do that in this classroom. So please, model for our students here the good behavior and the goodwill we wish from all of our elected officials. What do I mean? No heckling, whistling, booing, or otherwise imposing on your fellow citizens' rights to hear what these two brave candidates want to say. We're deeply committed at the Batten School to civil discourse and academic freedom. It is to defend those freedoms that we will act promptly to protect folks' right to hear their candidates. Two fellow citizens from our community have had the courage to stand up and compete to represent us in troubled times. We honor both Denver Riggleman and Leslie Cockburn for that remarkable commitment. We commend both of them for their determination to engage in not just one or two, but a whole series of debates throughout this sprawling district. Mr. Monroe and Mr. Madison managed to disagree agreeably. We trust that our candidates and our audience all will help us do no less tonight. This debate has been co-sponsored by our Center for Effective Lawmaking, a leading national research center here in Charlottesville, and by two student groups deeply interested in its outcome, college Republicans and university Democrats. Their leaders, I would point out, have worked with us in a truly patriotic spirit, a spirit utterly devoid of partisan gamesmanship. They've chosen to speak both together tonight and to act jointly as keepers of the fair time clock. Please join me in welcoming their representatives, Mary Alice Kukoski and Robert Andrews, for very brief comments. Thank you.
Professor Warburg said I only had an hour, so I'll keep this quick. First of all, thank you to our wonderful candidates for being here. I think it says a lot about you two and that you care about young people and young voters specifically. So thank you both genuinely for being here. Thank you for the Center for Effective Lawmaking in Batten. Thank you for our partners and friends, the University Democrats. This has truly been unified effort. And one quick shout out I'd like to give to our debate initiatives committee chaired by Mr. Bradley Katcher and co-chaired by Mr. Adam Kimmelman. They've worked extremely hard to put this all together, working with our friends from UDEMs, and I'm proud to call them friends. So with that being said, we look forward to a spirited discussion. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, students, for your commitment to engagement. Many of our students will be voting for the first time this November, and it is really your future that we're discussing here tonight. So we especially appreciate your leadership and initiative. I am Craig Volden, Professor of Public Policy and Politics and co-director of the Center for Effective Lawmaking. Before I call on the candidates for their opening statements, I'll briefly review the standard Batten School debate ground rules agreed to by both campaigns. Candidates will have 3 minutes each for opening statements and 2 minutes each for closing remarks. The order of speakers was determined by a coin flip earlier this evening. Ms. Cockburn will speak first. Mr. Riggleman will get the last word in closing statements. We plan to call for those closing statements soon after 7:25 p.m. We as moderators will put questions to candidates in turn with 90-second responses and a 60-second rebuttal permitted. Candidates will typically not receive the same question as they may have already had a chance to state their views in rebuttal. When we do ask the same question, each candidate will have 90 seconds to offer their views and rebuttals will be waived. Our student timekeepers will be gentle but firm in enforcing time limits to avoid filibusters. We as moderators reserve the right to ask for a quick follow-up question as necessary to clarify. Our initial round will focus on leadership and public policy for national issues. We'll then weave in foreign policy and international security matters as time permits and some fundamentally local concerns as well. The questions we two moderators will pose tonight have been vetted by us and by the Center for Effective Lawmaking's Greer Kelly and Professor Andy Pennick, seated right there, and merged with questions we have received online from 5th District voters and tonight submitted in writing by you, our audience members. To be fully transparent, our nonpartisan committee of 4 has researched and agreed upon key topics informed by the submission from 5th District voters. The candidates themselves have not seen any of the questions in advance. We hope that tonight's debate will serve the public interest and enlighten fellow citizens regarding the positions of these two candidates. We meet tonight at a time of great division in our nation and in our community. We believe we can take a small step in healing recent wounds through civil discourse and intentional listening, especially listening respectfully to those with whom we might disagree. So we are going to ask you to listen intently and to hold your applause throughout, except for now, when we wish to welcome to the Batten School tonight's candidates, Ms. Leslie Cockburn and Mr. Denver Riggleman. Ms. Cockburn, you are now recognized for your opening statement of 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm on. It is a great honor to be here at UVA. I'm very conscious of the meaning of being here for this particular debate and this particular race. You know, James Madison had to ride through the district. I get to drive. I've put 73,000 miles on the car. The district lines were a little different, but he had to ride so far that he got frostbite doing so. And only won because he realized he could reach out to the Baptists and get their vote, which led to the Bill of Rights. I live in Rappahannock County. Rappahannock County is an hour north of here. My husband and I have had our farm there for nearly 20 years. I moved from Washington. I moved our residence to Rappahannock about 11 years ago. I'm a farmer. I have organic hay, and I have Red Devon cattle. Red Devons were the favorite cows of George Washington. In fact, they were the first cows to arrive in the New World. Before that, I was an investigative journalist for 35 years. What does that mean? That means I was a producer at 60 Minutes, covering the world, a correspondent at Frontline, I've written books, magazine pieces, covered more than 50 countries, covered some of the most important issues of our time. There are so many skills that translate perfectly to the needs of this moment in our country. Our country is in crisis. Our government is in crisis. It is not functioning the way it is meant to function. From my background, I was lucky enough to do some extraordinary things. I often give the example of National Guardsmen who were on patrol in Baghdad in Humvees with no armor on the bottom. They were called cardboard coffins. I worked with the Guard, we investigated it, we exposed it, we helped dramatically to get them up armored. That is the kind of skill that we can apply right now in Buckingham County, where there is a small community called Union Hill that is going to have an enormous compressor station in their midst, which will cause unbelievably pollution and illness. These are the kinds of things that are at stake in the 5th District and which my background is perfectly suited to.
Thank you. Mr. Riggleman, you are now recognized for your opening statement of 3 minutes.
Sort of hard to believe that I'm here. I graduated UVA in '98. Of 28 people. Could people hear me even with that? That's scary. Thank you very much. I rode my horse in. I'm not very good with technology. But I want to thank everybody for being here. I actually graduated in 1998 here at the ripe young age of 28 years old. I actually have my youngest daughter here. You were born here. Do you remember that? But anyway, so I'm just very excited to be here. My path here is pretty crazy. The fact that I'm actually sitting in my alma mater talking to you at the Batten School, running for Congress, makes me part of the American dream. And it's something that I'm so very proud to be a part of. My wife and I married very young at 19 years old, and by 1992, I enlisted in the United States Air Force. I had never gone to college. I was the oldest of 8 kids, and my dad actually worked as a janitor here, actually maintenance, here at the University of Virginia at the old hospital. So when I was a kid, I would go to work with him. And what's amazing to me is that we would ride up and down the elevator, and my dad was a boxer, and he pushed a little button, go ding, and that's how he taught me to box, was actually in the elevators here at UVA, which I know is a little bit odd, but, you know, we come from Appalachia. So anyhow, one day we're riding down the elevator, I was 12 years old, and he goes, "Hey, son," like, what's up, Pop? He said, "I don't want you to work here, I want you to go here." It's hard to believe in 1982 that I would be here in 2018 talking to you as a congressional candidate. It's hard to believe that in 1995, I actually got a scholarship to go here from the University of Virginia from the United States Air Force, where they sent me to Detachment 890. It's hard to believe that after my first 3 years of community college, where I had an incredible 1.1 GPA, that I actually graduated with distinction from the University of Virginia at 28 years old, and that my 3 daughters were here, and that I was able to learn things from Professor Sept and Professor Lynch, and to not be polemical. There was one thing they taught me, and they taught me this, is that truth pretty much overrides everything. You know, my first paper here, I got a D-. And I remember at the top of it, Professor Sept said, "Don't be polemical." And I remember in my life, that sort of stuck with me through my intelligence career, through all of my unbelievable experiences overseas, whether it's in Romania, Hungary, Israel, Diego Garcia, Oman, Yemeni border, Diego Garcia, Germany, England, everywhere you want to talk about, I've sort of been, and some places I can't talk about. So why am I running? I'm running because after all of that, the government attacked me and my family as we were trying to build things, manufacture things. I'm running because I had lobbyists and cronies try to control what we were doing in the 5th District when we built our distillery, Silverback Distillery in Afton, Virginia. And as we go through this debate, you're going to hear why I'm running, why this is personal, and why we had others come up to me afterwards and said, "Denver, we know you've never been involved with politics, but please help us." So I want to thank you guys. Thank you for having me here. It's hard to believe that a Wahoo is sitting here in Batten School running for office, and I have a lot of love for this place. So thank you, and thank you again for everything you've done for me here at the University of Virginia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riggleman. The first question is going to go to Mr. Riggleman. The first topic is health care. We're going to begin with leadership and public policy on national issues. Mr. Riggleman, the current Congress and the Trump administration have weakened but not repealed Obamacare. What obligations do you feel the federal government has regarding regulation and support of health care insurance markets? And if elected, what specific proposal would you champion to improve 5th District citizens' access to affordable health care?
I think it's pretty amazing when we look at the Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, how important health care is to us. Even in our family, we've had pre-existing conditions and so many things that have affected our life where we know health care is very important. And I was very fortunate in the military to have free health care, but it was bad health care. My question as we go forward, and we're talking about Obamacare right now, and we're looking at right now, we've seen premiums go up about 8% every year, and they really skyrocketed based, I think, on the inability of Democrats and Republicans to come together and actually offer a bipartisan solution for health care. I find it absolutely amazing that first, the Democrats broke health care and Republicans continue to break it down the line. I find it completely amazing that we think the government can control every function of our lives. So for me, I want health savings accounts. I want portability of health care. I think we can keep some of the good things of Obamacare. What I don't want is to have the government controlling every aspect of our Medicare, whether we go for Medicare for all or any kind of policy that allows the government to dictate what we do. The thing that bothers me most is that the government has dictated that we have third-party payers. I think at some portion, we got to get back to where we're in control of our health care. We have second-party payers because there's absolutely no transparency. And what you're looking at is you have health care lobbies that absolutely control what's going on. If you think about when Obamacare was instituted, the #1 donor class for Obamacare and the people who voted for it was the health care lobbies. Why is that? We have to, at some point, have a new health plan that actually encapsulates a combined minimum protections with free market types of activities like HSA, but also portability of health care across state lines.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cockburn, rebuttal.
Well, my opponent has pledged to join the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus has stated very clearly that they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which takes health care away from 23 million people. Also, they agree with the administration, which is right now saying that it is unconstitutional to guarantee health care to people with pre-existing conditions. When I go around the 5th District, rarely does someone hold up their hand when I say, who among you does not have a pre-existing condition? What that means is we need serious change. First of all, we know in Charlottesville alone, you can pay on the individual market for a family of 4 $36,000 a year because the subsidies have been taken away from insurance companies. We have a monopoly. That has to change. The Affordable Care Act needs to be restored, and then I would go further in the opposite direction.
Continuing on health care, a question for Ms. Cockburn. Rising health care costs are approaching unsustainable levels for both individuals in Virginia and across the country. What specific policy options do you support for holding down health care costs?
Healthcare costs are rising because of two things, immediate things. One is with the Affordable Care Act, by taking away subsidies from insurance companies, prices go up. That's why in Charlottesville, people have been, on the individual market, been paying 23% more than anywhere else in the country, including the Aleutian Islands. You need to restore the subsidy. You need to restore the individual mandate. If you don't have a healthy pool inside, if you don't have healthy people buying health insurance, then you can't sustain it. It's going to become very, very expensive. But also, if you put back the Affordable Care Act, you can then go one step further, which I approve of very much. The first step is to put Medicare on the exchange so that everyone can choose Medicare, because Medicare, the overhead is so much less than for individual insurance companies. It's 2 to 3% versus 19 to 25% overhead. Give people the choice of Medicare. This is not government health care. Medicare, as we know, has many individual providers and works quite well right now. There are a lot of people who are extremely happy with their Medicare. Let's spread it around and let's go further. But I have 2 seconds.
Mr. Riggleman.
Thank you. As we're looking at healthcare and we're looking at Obamacare, something came up today that was pretty interesting. And the fact is that the benchmark cost for Obamacare is actually going to fall next year for the first time. And you wonder, where does that come from? It comes from competition, period. When you look at what we're doing right now, and even looking in Charlottesville, and you have other providers coming in, seeing that the healthcare costs are too high, that is what's great about the American dream. That's what's great about what we can do as far as we're using free markets. I absolutely think that we have to have minimum standards for healthcare. I do, especially pre-existing conditions. But there's another thing too. I absolutely believe that we need to cover our children up to 26 years old and what we're having right now. So when you see repeal Obamacare, or we're tired of Trump care, or we're tired of this or tired of that, my guess is there needs to be some type of bipartisan commission that comes together and says, what are the basic belief systems that we have for healthcare, and then how do we make this more free market, whether it is portability or whether it's health savings accounts, or whether we have some way where we can split the government-mandated healthcare with free market healthcare, and I think that's the best that I have right now as far as an answer.
Our next topic is environmental protection, and the question goes to Mr. Riggleman. Conservation used to be a bipartisan cause that united people of different faiths and different political parties. In recent months, the Trump administration has rolled back regulations on coal and abandoned the Paris Climate Agreement. What do you see as the proper balance among energy production, deregulation, job creation, and protection of the environment?
Sure, and we have a personal experience with this. When we were building Silverback Distillery, we actually started based on how we do things, is that we wanted to protect the environment, which is why we became the first geothermal distillery in the United States. I don't think it's a bipartisan thing. I think we made it that way. Also, we also got in with the DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, and we had a fight against them. We had a small stream in the back of our distillery, and what happened was they said, hey, if that stream gets wet, it's part of the watershed and part of the Chesapeake watershed. I am absolutely okay with environmental regulations that are for the good of all of us. But once the government weaponizes regulations against people, it can get pretty crazy, and I'll give you an example. This wetwater stream had been there for a long time, so in order for us to build Silverback, they said we had to cut down 40 trees. We had to cut those trees and build a $40,000 retention pond, right, for a stream that actually got wet only when it rained. When I actually argued about this, they said, well, we were sued by the EPA, so that any type of phosphorus that comes off any type of roofs, even on an agriculture building, is going to be actually fined if you don't do this. The ridiculous of the situation is this. We can't destroy business because we have regulators that are lacking any type of common sense on executing the laws. What you have is that the government can weaponize regulations against the small business owner at any time, and I've seen that firsthand. So I think the balance is this. Let's have regulations that make sense, and let's not let the government weaponize those regulations, because I've actually been a victim of that, and that is why I'm actually sitting here today, and that was one of the reasons.
Ms. Cockburn.
The Trump administration is eviscerating the Environmental Protection Agency. As well as being a journalist, I spent 10 years on the board of an environmental organization, conservation organization in this district. I have fought pipelines, power lines, and uranium mining. We have huge environmental issues right now in the 5th. We have 2 pipelines, which are unnecessary for Virginia, which will not keep the lights on here, that are invading businesses, invading sustainable farms, and invading communities. These pipelines should be reversed. On climate change issues alone, these pipelines will leak the same amount of greenhouse gas, leak enough methane to be the greenhouse gas equivalent of 46 coal-fired plants. We have to reverse the damage being done here and in Washington.
Our next question is on economic growth for Ms. Cockburn. The U.S. economy has grown every quarter since late 2009, yet many citizens have been left behind. What proposals do you support for targeted growth of good jobs?
This is a huge area for 90 seconds. First of all, we need a living wage. We have stagnant wages, and this is resulting in a disastrous situation for this country where many, many, many people are being left behind, and many people, don't forget, we have 21 rural counties around Charlottesville, and people are being left behind. Job growth here is, I've spent 16 months on the trail in this district. And what I see, the exciting thing I see is renewable energy, without question. We have in every county, many counties don't even talk to each other about what we're doing, but in every county there is a solar project. In Charlottesville, we have some of the most interesting solar companies in the world. So knitting together all of that, we can have a renaissance in renewable energy in the 5th District, and we can give jobs to people who are ready. If you work on a farm, if you can build a fence, if you can dig a well, you can put a solar panel on a roof, and you can maintain it. There is an easy transition for people in rural counties to solar. So I am a big advocate of that as for jobs.
Mr. Riggleman?
We talked about the shape of the district beforehand, and really, if you look at a map, the district looks like a dragon riding a scooter. So it's 21 counties. So if you look from the north to the south, in the north part, Fauquier County, you have about 2.3% unemployment with a median family income of about $91,000 per year. So let's go down to Brunswick County. Brunswick County, you have a median family income of about $37,000 per year and an unemployment rate of 4.7%. So as you go north, you actually start to see GDPs rising coming from the North Carolina border all the way up to Warrenton. What I've seen right now is this. Yes, we have 4.2% GDP right now growth coming up that was just reported. What I've seen is that there's not enough labor for the jobs that are actually in the district right now. So we went down range and we saw a business that has 300 employees. I asked him how he was doing. He said, Denver, our problem is we can't get the right technical type of training people to actually fill these jobs. They have 200 jobs that they need to be filled. If you look at agriculture, they can't even find the manual labor to actually fill those jobs. We have gone from 4% to 3% unemployment in the last year. My guess is if we can do better with technical training and better with actually identifying the jobs that we need, we can actually drop that unemployment even lower.
Thank you very much. Our next topic is budget deficits. This question comes from Mr. Matthew Baker of Charlottesville. Quote, the U.S. currently has more than 20 trillion, excuse me, it's for Mr. Riggleman. Question for Mr. Riggleman from Matthew Baker. Quote, the U.S. currently has more than $20 trillion worth of debt. If you were sent to Congress, what would you specifically do to address this problem? Close quote.
Audit every single agency. You know, right now, I've worked in the Department of Defense for off and on military, contracting, and CEO for 26 years. I don't think we can overlook any agency and what's going on as far as what we need to cut as far as spending to ensure that we don't keep actually putting every single citizen in the United States in indentured servitude going forward. When you look at some of the slough and some of the slush that you see in every federal agency, it starts to irritate you a little bit. When you look at the Department of Defense, the estimates of administrative overruns, costs, and hidden costs could be anywhere between $100 to $200 billion. Not 100 to 200 million, 100 to 200 billion. When you look at Medicare fraud and Medicaid fraud, it's astronomical. When you look at any type of agency that has a massive bureaucratic overreach, you have too many people usually working there. And what you have to do, and not only too many people, you have too many regulatory things that are happening that you have to address. It's just part of what's happening. The other part, too, is we have to keep growing the economy. There's no way that we can tax ourselves out of this. We have to continue to try to grow our economy as fast as we can to up the individual tax base to make sure that we can pay for the things that we need. The problem that I see is that we're so out of touch on the left and the right that we can't see that there's probably a middle road that we can take here. And that is to make sure that we audit and look at what we can cut first, make sure that our tax cuts or how we're doing taxes actually match our spending cuts. It is something that we can do. If we look at individual rates, we're actually creating more jobs. We're 1% higher on collecting taxes at $105 billion. What we have to do is we have to make sure that people can keep to grow based on tax cuts and keeping the economy growing.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn.
Well, the Freedom Caucus has a different view. They are not bipartisan on these issues. They voted for the tax bill, the Trump tax bill. The Trump tax bill has added $1.9 trillion to the deficit of this country. It's a lot of money. They have put in tax breaks for corporations, tax breaks for the rich, and temporary and very small tax breaks for the middle class. This is going to cost a lot because that doesn't even count the interest on it. And if the temporary tax cuts are made permanent, it will then be over $2 trillion that they have added to the deficit. This is not a good idea and needs to be reversed. Also, I would remind everyone in the room that the reversal, the tearing apart of Dodd-Frank, which was put into place to protect us from having another financial crash, is wrong. We need Dodd-Frank. The reason we need it is because—
I have to point to the time at some point here.
Okay, let me just finish the sentence. That we actually paid $17 trillion to the banks, including the Fed window, for that crisis.
Thank you. The next question also comes from the community. It is from Ms. Cockburn. Ms. Cockburn, quote, "You have come out in support of Medicare for all." It's from Alexander Siller of Charlottesville, excuse me. "You have come out in support of Medicare for all. What specific taxes would you consider raising and programs would you consider reducing in order to fund this plan?" Close quote.
You have to realize when you think about Medicare for all, which is a great idea. It's an idea that is taking hold in the Senate and is certainly taken hold even before that in the House of Representatives. There are different plans. How do you pay for it? Let's look at what we're already paying first. Healthcare costs in this country have reached $3.5 trillion a year. In 8 years from now, according to government figures, it's going to approach $7 trillion. And that is with the dysfunctional system that we have at the moment. Remember, millions of people are not covered, and remember that we pay twice as much as any other industrialized country per person. We're paying over $10,000 per person for this healthcare system that we have now. We need to change this. As I say, there are a number of plans, and there's a huge amount of controversy over this. But let's look at first what we will save. Let's negotiate drug prices. If we look at what Europeans pay, we can save $2.5 trillion over 10 years if we just negotiate drug prices. Overhead prices, hundreds of billions of dollars that we pay in overhead, we will not pay. I only have 6 seconds. So I'm going to continue in my next time slot.
Thank you. Mr. Riggleman?
Yeah, I find it interesting. We talk about the bills that have been passed in Congress and talk about debt and deficit, and we're talking about a $40 trillion bill over 10 years. I can say this is going to be a short answer. Medicare for all is a utopian pie-in-the-sky idea. I think it's just an idea that just isn't going to work. So I think what we need to do is we have to look at some other options that probably are a little bit more common sense than Medicare for all, and it's something I won't support. Thank you.
On to immigration reforms for Mr. Riggleman. What specific immigration reforms do you support or oppose, including a path to citizenship, DACA, border security, and adjusting overall immigration totals, which this year are at historic lows?
I think specifically for the 5th District, when you look at the immigration issues that are here, I've had some very interesting conversations with the farmers, whether they be fruit pickers, whether they be tobacco farmers, whether they be dairy farmers, based on their issues with labor. I had a roundtable with 30 dairy farmers, and they said, you might have to do something that could hurt you. And I'm like, what's that? And he said, you might have to fight for us because we don't have enough workers, and we need more migrant workers. They went through the whole spiel about what happens with their H-2A workers and what's happening with them with the regulatory issues that they have. Number one, I don't know if anybody knows this, I talked to a farmer who had 105 H-2A workers, and he has to pay $75 per worker for that worker to drive on his own private property. He also has to do things for housing and insurance that are actually debilitating. What he asked was this. He said, we need more workers. He said, Denver, please support us in our H-2C costs so that we can actually get more workers into the 5th District because we don't have enough. I went to another farm, and he said he had people working there for over 30 years. 30 years. So here's what I think we need to do. We need to secure the border first. Secondly, we need to look at streamlining immigration right now. And that means especially for people in the 5th District. We have farmers out there hurting for labor. We have a superheated economy, and they can't fill the jobs. We have to do that. After we do that, we streamline immigration, we secure the border, we look at E-Verify as a real data solution to vet these people that are working for the employers all over the country. I think if we do those three things, I think we can come to an agreement on fixing the immigration problem here in the country.
Ms. Cockburn?
We have one of the most shocking situations right now that I have ever experienced. Look at what has happened on the border of this country with children being separated from their parents. This is wrong, it is immoral, it is a crime against humanity. We have a president who tells us that immigrants are criminals. In our own district, we have a detention center in Farmville. When you speak to Latinx people here in Charlottesville, it is one of the scariest things that they can think of. We need comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship, without question. We have, on the Republican side, votes in the House repeatedly to make this impossible. We must make it possible. We must support the DACA kids and now the DACA adults. We must make life for them better and appreciate what they're doing for the economy of the Fifth.
Thank you. The next two questions I'm going to present you are on the topic of criminal justice reform and gun rights, and they come from citizens who have responded online. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you. There were hundreds of questions submitted to this university. The first question goes to Ms. Cockburn. It is from Peyton of Danville, Virginia. Quote, according to research by Campaign Zero's Use of Force Project, African-American U.S. citizens are 3 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than Caucasian citizens. What, if any, policy solutions can help curb this disproportionate police use of force? Close quote.
There are several good bills in the House right now that have been proposed by Democrats, and I would add my name to those bills. They have to do with training, police training, de-escalation. I will say that I've met with the sheriff in Danville, who is really trying to start community policing in Danville, which will make a huge difference. We have a major problem here, and we have to address it. I think that we need body cams. We need all of the things that there are many proposals to, when I say police de-escalation, right now the police are in fact getting military training. And this kind of training means that you treat people as though you're in Baghdad or Basra rather than meeting with a citizen on a highway. It is shocking numbers, African Americans being stopped, African Americans being killed in these encounters. And also, it is equally shocking that if you're African American, you are 10 times more likely to be jailed for drugs than if you're white. This is wrong. I believe in some serious comprehensive criminal justice reform.
Mr. Riggleman.
Thank you. I think there's a few things here. I'm pretty close with law enforcement, and I think 3 of the things that I've talked to, whether it's Fauquier County, Nelson County, is this. It's really training, education, right? And we have to have some kind of metric or some kind of way to punish those who use race in any way to harm others, and that includes law enforcement. There are actually some things here Leslie and I agree with on criminal justice reform for sure. Number one is the simple fact that victimless crimes, we have to have something about marijuana. My brother was caught with only 1.4 pounds of marijuana, and I think at that point, he did become a felon at that point. I wasn't with him, but what I'm trying to say here is that not only do we have to have the training and education and the punishment necessary for those who use race in any type of criminal activity like this, we have to see that victimless crimes, we have to do something in our system where we actually help to rehabilitate and not incarcerate them immediately. It's just something I feel very strongly about, and I think it's something we can all work on together.
The next question comes from Cindy Taylor of Madison, Virginia. It is from Mr. Riggleman, and I quote, "You have stated that you oppose all new gun safety reform measures. Does this include opposition to banning bump stocks, which enabled the Las Vegas gunman to shoot nearly 500 people in 10 minutes, end to red flag laws, close quote.
Yes, and thanks for the question. And that's a sensitive question. Number one, the bump stock did not do that. It was the person with the multiple weapons in the room that actually killed people. Number two, as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, I'm not going to change anything with the Second Amendment. My job is up here and actually enforce the constitutional rules that we have in place right now. So at this point, there are certain things that we can do for mental health, education, and to find those people that are doing these type of things. But for me, no assault weapon ban. We're not going to ban bump stocks. We're going to actually go at the root of the problem, which is going after the criminal element and making sure that we keep the Second Amendment strong. That's what I'm going to do.
I would support banning bump stocks. Who needs more than 10 rounds? Tell me. And in fact, it is police often who are at the wrong end of people who have bump stocks. Certainly the Baltimore police have been very vocal about this. I see no point in having bump stocks allowed in this country. Large capacity magazines are unnecessary. We should ban them. And I also support the 2018 assault weapons ban. I personally come from a hunting family. I believe in the hunting culture. It is very important in the 5th District. This has nothing to do with that. This has to do with weapons in the hands of people who have no training, weapons in the hands of people who have mental illness. This should not be allowed. We need to close those gun show loopholes, and many gun owners agree with that, and close loopholes for people who are guilty of domestic violence.
The next question is on executive overreach. It's brought to us by Hunter Wagner in the audience tonight, and it goes to Ms. Cockburn. In recent years, the executive branch has taken certain powers away from Congress through executive orders. If elected, what is a feasible way to collaborate with fellow congressmen to mitigate or alleviate this issue?
Well, we need to restore the Congress's constitutional right to declare war. This changed after the crisis of 9/11 in 2001. It was meant to be something quite limited, going after Al-Qaeda. It is not limited now. We are now fighting endless wars, not only a 17-year war in Afghanistan, but wars all over the world. We have people in Syria. We have a brutal war going on in Yemen. We have people at war all over Africa. I believe that those decisions need to be made by Congress because Congress has to answer to constituents. The President of the United States should not have that ability. It is unconstitutional. I think that that is the most important fact of overreach. Our wars right now, we are now fighting these wars. These are credit card wars. We can't afford these wars. My friend John Sopko, who is one of the people who is looking closely at what goes on in Afghanistan for the government, has found that that war has cost just under $1 trillion, that war alone. Shouldn't we all be making those decisions? And shouldn't our priorities be a little different? We are not winning that war. We need the constituents and we need Congress to make the decisions about war.
Mr. Riggleman?
Yeah, part of the Freedom Caucus's responsibility is to actually stop the overreach of presidential powers. For me, when you take the oath, you're taking an oath to the Constitution and what the Constitution directs you to do as a representative, and I'm representing the 5th. We do have a lot going on in the world right now. My job, it's going to be hard to go backwards, the type of things we've seen over the last 30 years as executive privilege has overridden pretty much anything that we can do, right, in the congressional line based on wars and things of that nature. For me, we cannot actually allow any more of our authorities to go away. It's time for Congress to step back and make the decisions and legislate for those people that they represent. I represent the 5th District. I take an oath to the United States Constitution, but I work for you. I work for the 5th. So my job is to ensure that I do the right things based on the Constitution, that I fight for what's right based on our responsibilities, and I retain the power from me that you voted me to have in my congressional seat.
Turning to party leadership, a question for Mr. Riggleman. Given the heightened role of political parties in today's national politics, what do you see the Republican Party standing for in 5 years, either with or without President Trump? And how will you help bring about the best version of your party?
I think what you're seeing in the Republican Party is a movement towards liberty. I think what you see in the Republican Party is a movement toward fiscal constraint, and I hope that's where we keep going. But what I really see in the Republican Party is a move towards freedom. In the next 5 years, I think you're going to see something that we probably have never seen before, and I think I'm going to get some smiles and some frowns out there, when I say some of these things. Number one, in 5 years, I don't think you're going to see us involved in many wars around the globe. In 5 years, however, I think you're going to see real damage done by cyber intrusion and other types of acts of war on our infrastructure and things of that nature. I think in the next 5 years, the Republican Party is going to have to look inward rather than outward to make sure that we protect what's happening, because there's new warfare coming at us every single day. It's what I do. I'm in the Pentagon. I'm still a senior consultant for electronic warfare and countermeasures for the Pentagon. So what I see in the next 5 years as Republicans and Democrats, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look inward. How do we protect our critical infrastructure? What do you do about cyber attack? What do we do about the constant wars that we have overseas? What do we do about the amount of money that we're spending every day? I think at some point, the Republican Party has to pull back the reins and say enough. We have to stop the out-of-control spending. We have to stop the special interests that control every portion of our party. We got to stop the lobbyists and the cronyists that seem to be able to dictate anything that we need to do. We need to have people who actually help others. And that's something that I want to do, and I think that's the change that you're seeing in the Republican Party, is that how do we take lobbyist cronyism and that kind of unmitigated spending out of our economy?
Ms. Cockburn.
I would remind everybody that former Speaker John Bonner of the Republican Party described the Freedom Caucus as anarchists. They want only chaos. So he didn't believe that they were engaging in a good working relationship with their own party. My view is, and my hope is, first of all, we need to take back the Fifth and take back the House. The reason why the Democrats need to take the House, we need changes in every committee of leadership in every committee. We have a lot of work to do. We need accountability on Capitol Hill, and we need it so badly that there are many Republicans who see that this is the right path as well. Enough of what has been going on. And I'm sure we all felt it yesterday.
Ms. Cockburn, do you support House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi's vision for the future of the Democratic Party? Where do you agree and where do you disagree?
This is a famously Republican question. I think the important thing about any leader, and we know that Nancy Pelosi is coming to the end of her leadership and others are jockeying for that position. The important thing, the only important thing that a representative of the Fifth needs to ask is, what is the leader going to do for the Fifth? How can a leader help the 5th District? That's it. There are many people who would be good leaders that I can see among the Democrats on the Hill. So I think that's the beginning and end of the question.
Mr. Riggleman.
It is a famously Republican question, I think. I think Leslie was right. I don't know how to answer that for her. I mean, it's just, whoever Leslie supports or doesn't support really isn't any of my concern. My concern is really to run this race and do the best that I can. And if she says she supports or doesn't support, I don't think that's going to matter to the voters of the Fifth. I think what's going to matter is we're out there campaigning. We're engaging on the battlefield of ideas and doing the best we can. So really, she supports Nancy Pelosi or not, I don't think it's going to matter to the voters of the Fifth.
We're going to get to international and local issues in one moment, but first, one more question for both of you on the topic of political polarization. And this comes from Mr. Adam Kimmelman of Charlottesville, with Mr. Riggleman responding first. Quote, "We live in extremely polarized times. What one issue would you be willing to break with your party leadership and work across the political aisle to accomplish?" Close quote.
Spending. I mean, for me, it's about the debt ceiling. For me, it's about For me, it's about mortgaging the future of all of our children and everybody in this country, in the United States. I think at some point we have to stop with this unmitigated spending, and I think with what we passed in the omnibus, I sort of look at it quizzically because a lot of that was really a lot of pork. And I think you have to break with those that you think are spending taxpayer money either unethically or they're spending taxpayer money in a way that doesn't benefit us in the long run. So I think at this point right now, bipartisan-wise, I think the first thing we need to do is get together and make sure that our spending is reined in right now. Because I think that is actually a threat to us in so many ways based on what we're burdening our children with as we go forward in the future.
I'm putting the same question to Ms. Cockburn, and you have a full 90 seconds to respond. I'm going to read the question again. We live in extremely polarized times. What one issue would you be willing to break with your party and work across the aisle to accomplish?
Well, I have a very practical one, and that's one that's already bipartisan. I would support H.R. 800, and that is rural broadband. It is creating basically an important office in the Department of Agriculture with an undersecretary, which gives it some power, which will treat rural broadband like rural electrification. The reason why this is so important is that out around this district, kids go to the parking lot of the library in order to do their homework. How can we move forward in the 5th? In the 5th district, it's rural. There are lots of people who would love to work from home. There are lots of people who would love to be entrepreneurs. There are lots of people among those children who want an excellent education. We need rural broadband. That is the first bipartisan issue I would work very hard to support.
Thank you very much. We are now going to shift to international policy and leadership. My first question pertains to trade. The question goes to Ms. Cockburn. Do you support Trump administration moves to scrap the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, impose tariffs on Chinese goods, and reopen NAFTA? How do these policies affect citizens here in the 5th District?
These policies are having a very serious effect in the 5th District. Let's talk about tariffs for a moment. If you're a dairy farmer in Campbell County, you will find that because Mexico will no longer buy American cheese, particular cheeses, that the bowl of milk in the United States is too big and prices are going down. They are suffering. Even distillers, there is the biggest distillery in Virginia did an ad with us where they talked about the problems because they can compete in the world market. But because of the tariffs, they will be severely crippled in those efforts. Anyone with a brewery who wants an aluminum can is being affected. The latest trade figures, which I was just reading today in Bloomberg, there's a big problem. As of August, we had a trade deficit that's enormous, biggest ever. International trade is slowing down. Many people in the 5th sell abroad, whether it's soybeans, and I've got some soybean farmers who are supporting me because of this, because I am very opposed to the tariffs. In looking at TPP, I think that there were problems with that agreement. There were problems that I could see, but they were not the same problems as the Trump administration sees.
Thank you very much. Rebuttal, Mr. Riggleman.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say this: they're not the biggest distillery. We dwarf them in sales. So, but thanks for that. Number two, as far as trade and tariffs, I think at this point we have to look at it almost in a 1-2 case, especially when you talk to farmers down in Southside. If you say NAFTA down in the bottom 12 or 13 counties, you're going to get run out of town. So let's talk about free trade and fair trade. Distillers. She's right. We pay $400 more per tote, more or less, based on the tariffs that have been enacted. However, with the economy, our growth has gone up 28% per month, month over the last 2 years. What's happening? There are trade-offs. And what I've talked with farmers is this. They said, we need fair trade for free trade. And when you're a businessman and you're looking at things like how do you invest, you sometimes have to put money forward or get a better deal in order for long-term gain. So what we've seen is tobacco farmers, they're angry. China tariffs are going to hurt them. Timber, they're happy. This has been great for them. Dairy, sort of on the fence. Some have helped, some have hurt, based on if you use processed good or liquid milk. If you're talking about liquid milk, you're talking about actually dumping from the northern dairy farmers. It's much more complex for... Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't say... Sorry about that.
Fairness,
Thank
I
you.
want to note the time. Please finish your sentence.
Thank you.
This is an unpleasant task. I'm glad to be guided by the bipartisan hands in the back of the room. My next question has to do with Russia policy. It goes to Mr. Riggleman. Mr. Riggleman, do you believe President Trump has charted a course for U.S.-Russia relations that advances U.S. interests?
Well, it depends. So right now, when you look at Russia, they have a couple types of strategies that they use to actually not only infiltrate the United States utilizing cyber, but also sort of their hegemonic pursuits overseas. I think what we're trying to do is to reach out to Russia, not because we think in some respects that they're not the enemy, but to try to slow down some of the things that are happening. Also, when you look at our policy towards Russia right now, we've actually increased funding to fight them on the cyber front. You see, it's just like anything else when you're looking at it's sort of foreign policy and global policy, as really the one hand, you're trying not to let the second hand see what you're doing. It's sort of difficult for me to go into a lot of, and I hate using this because I am still at the Pentagon, but right now all I can tell you is this. Our funding for Russia has actually increased for offensive and defensive operations. We know that. We also know that Russia is making a huge play in the Balkans, but they're also making a huge play in Syria and Libya. All this we know. We also know, as far as Idlib's concerned, right now we need some kind of bipartisan sort of effect or some kind of sanctions against Russia based on the activities that they're doing in Syria. These things I sort of deal with every day. So to look at the foreign policy on the transparent side, what you're seeing that's going on, say, on TV or with the chattering class, it's not actually what's going on with our priorities in the intelligence community or the warfighting community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn.
Well, I think the elephant in the room is we have a huge investigation going on at the moment, which everyone in this room is aware of. And we need to let that investigation take its course. But it is a very serious accusation against various people who are involved with the president, who are involved with the election, and Russian involvement in that election. I think we will all watch with great interest to see how this unfolds. But these accusations and this investigation could not be more serious. Everything is at stake here. On the other hand, in looking at Russia as a serious foe, I would remind you that the Russian defense budget has gone down 17%, that it is far less at $61 billion than the increase in 1 year that's just happened in the American defense budget, which is now $82 billion.
Turning to local and district policy concerns on economic growth with the question from Ms. Cockburn. Across possibilities ranging from agriculture to technology, what are the greatest opportunities for economic growth in the 5th District? What can the government do or avoid doing to ensure that the benefits of that growth are broadly shared?
When you look at economic growth in the district, I've mentioned renewable energy, but you also have to look at something that's very important. When you look at Danville, Pittsylvania, Halifax, Southside counties and city, there are 2,500 open jobs there. That is everything from highly skilled labor to McDonald's. Why are they open? One of the biggest reasons is people cannot pass a drug test. When you think about employment, you also have to think about treatment. And it's critical because there's a federal piece here. There are federal dollars that go into treatment centers. So I've spent some serious time looking at the best treatment centers. And the best treatment centers are centers that are run by recovering addicts. They understand that you have to be involved with this program, not for 28 days, but for 8 months. You need help with employment. So thinking about employment, think about treatment, they cannot be separated here. In terms of opportunity beyond renewable energy, there are very exciting opportunities. Like, for example, we have breweries every 5 feet. They like to buy local, and this 5th District is one of the best places in the country to grow malting barley. We have plenty of need and demand for malting barley, and it's a good cash crop, and it grows well south side.
Mr. Riggleman?
60 seconds. I think, number one, I think when you look at the incredible potential of the 5th District, one of them is the fact that every single locality that I go to, all 21 counties, seem to have labor shortages. I think we have to look at not only technical training, but we have to look at some way to get people in the right pipelines to do the kind of jobs that they need to do. Especially down in Halifax, especially down in Pennsylvania. We've been to some of the same places. We're looking at some areas where I think they're 20 to 30% underperforming as far as being able to find employees. That's pretty specific. Also, what you see down there are massive infrastructure issues. Not only broadband, but you got water and sewer, but you also have road issues. And I think we need to have a combined infrastructure policy, because if we're going to attract businesses in here, we got to make sure that we have the type of internet connectivity, but also roads and things of that nature, because people want that good stuff. I think once that happens, once we have sort of a policy of ensuring that we grow infrastructure, but we also look at the job training needed for those jobs, and do something like, I don't know, legalize industrial hemp. I think if we do some of those things, I think we can actually get jobs growing even faster.
Thank you. On the topic of balancing rights and liberties for Mr. Riggleman, the University of Virginia and the city of Charlottesville have been struggling to strike a balance between the rights of free assembly and protest and the protection of public property and public safety. What do you think is the best way to strike that balance?
I think it's to go back to process. When you look at where I come from, if you do counterterrorism, you do counterintelligence, you do these type of things, what makes something violent, or what creates the impetus for a government to say this is enough and to affect law enforcement against that problem? And it really comes back to the definition of a domestic terrorism. The First Amendment is something so incredibly special and precious to all of us. We have to ensure that at all times we protect that First Amendment right. But as soon as somebody uses a political agenda and they weaponize that against the Constitution of the United States or the rights of others, at that time they become a domestic terrorist. At that time they have broken the law. It's very difficult when you see some of the mouth breathers that came into Virginia, right, and some of the things that they have done. Whether you're talking about white supremacists who walk in here and do the type of things that they do. If anybody, however, on any side weaponizes their political action, law enforcement has to engage. So as you're looking across what's happening in our district, I thought actually this August 12th, I thought law enforcement did an incredible job. I was down here. I thought they did a fantastic job. But what you have to remember, though, is there has to be a balance between rights and a balance between if somebody's actually a domestic terrorist. And we can never take it too far on that other side either. We have to find that balance between what the First Amendment is and what the definitions, whether it's through the Joint Task Force or whether it's through what an HVE is, a homegrown violent extremist. We have to make those distinctions, and we have to enforce those laws when they break the law.
Ms. Cockburn?
I think what happened in Charlottesville last August 12th taught us that while free speech is a great thing, and I support it 100%, bringing weapons in to enforce that free speech is not something we want in Charlottesville or anywhere in the 5th District. Weapons do not belong in those circumstances. Bringing along a militia when you have a point of view that you're trying to push should not be allowed. My feeling about Charlottesville, and there were a lot of difficult legal issues for Charlottesville, but I felt, and I've said publicly in the past, that I thought that Charlottesville should have said, sue us. You can't bring those weapons here. Now, I know that my opponent, initially, his reaction to that event on August 12th was, it takes two to tango. I do not believe it took two to tango. I believe that there was a group of people inciting violence and others who were trying to protect citizens who were in danger. We had a synagogue that was in danger here that was threatened. We had racial issues here. We had housing communities who felt very threatened by what happened. And that's my time.
Thank you. The next question comes from the audience. Ms. Charlotte Gibson of Charlottesville asks the following question, which I will pose first to Ms. Cockburn and then rebuttal from Mr. Riggleman. And the question is as follows. Do you support Congress enacting the Equal Rights Amendment once the 38th state ratifies, which could be the Commonwealth of Virginia in January 2019? Close quote.
Yes. Of course I do. This is one of the most important things to me. I'm the granddaughter of a suffragette and have spent my entire adult life pushing for equal rights for women in the workplace. I remember in 1974 when a woman could not get a loan without a man co-signing it. Couldn't get a credit card. Couldn't get a loan for a business or for a house without a man co-signing. We have really come a long way, really a long way, and we need to protect that. And the Equal Rights Amendment is a very, very important part of that. We need equal pay. That's supposed to be the law, but we need to enforce it. For many reasons, but also because older women, because they haven't gotten equal pay, they're not getting equal Social Security. And that creates a problem of poverty among older women. So on every level, I'm very excited about the Equal Rights Amendment.
Mr. Riggleman.
Yes, I mean, you know, it's amazing. I have 3 daughters and a wife that run all of our business interests right now while I'm running for Congress. So when it comes to equal rights, I would actually say that they're probably a little bit more equal than me and do a lot more great stuff. But as far as Equal Rights Amendment, I'm just going to say this. I think the Constitution covers what we need to do. I don't think we need another amendment. Thank you.
I'm going to turn at this point to issues that relate to district leadership. And my question at this point will go to Mr. Riggleman. Mr. Riggleman, if elected, how would you strive to represent the citizens of the entire district, indeed the entire nation, not just those of your own political party?
Well, I think that goes to what we've been trying to do here. I mean, I think we have a pretty interesting race in that we have 2 people that have never done this before and are actually going around the district trying to get every idea they can to what best helps the 5th. Right now, you see what's happening. Partisanship is so bitter, it's so acrimonious. I'm here because, to be honest with you, when I went up to the State House to try to fight for myself, not being part of any political party, the party that fought me the most was the Republicans. I found it pretty odd that the ones that I was asking to cut taxes and to help small businesses and to help with the regulatory weaponization they were doing against multiple companies, I thought it odd that they were fighting for another side. I said, why is that? I thought Republicans were for free markets. I thought we were for low taxes. I thought we were for protecting the Constitution. I thought we were for taking out all this lobbyist, cronyist stuff that goes on behind the scenes. I've seen it firsthand. I've been attacked by it. So at some point, somebody has to fight, maybe who've never been involved with politics like myself. They have to fight for something that's sort of greater than what a party is. And that's what are people's values in the 5th District. There's a shared value and a shared work ethic in every single county. If you go from Fauquier all the way down to Pennsylvania, go all the way over to Bedford or Henry, and all the way over to Cumberland or Prince Edward, everybody has this shared work ethic. And I think what I've seen is they don't listen to the chattering class or TV. Like, Denver, here's our issues. Can you help us? Will you help us? And will you do it despite any type of party apparatus? And that's what they tell me, and that's what I'm going to do.
Ms. Cockburn for rebuttal.
To represent the 5th District, we need fairness. We need to keep that utmost in our mind. We have people who are very dramatically affected by the problems of regulation. For example, in Pittsylvania County the other night, I was with a group of people who live right down the road from the farm where there could be massive uranium mining if the Supreme Court overturns the ban on uranium mining. If that happens, what they're already talking about in the Pennsylvania Board of Supervisors is what to do about birth defects, what to do about the 25 different severe health effects that you can get from uranium mining. These are the sorts of issues where we need to protect people, we need to respect people, and we need to truly represent them.
The next set of questions relate to reform options, specifically in our elections. And this question is addressed initially to Ms. Cockburn. A number of UVA students, indeed a number of the students who are in the class, in the debate today in the audience are involved in nonpartisan reform campaigns such as One Virginia, and that includes Democratic and Republican students. With incumbent politicians still empowered to pick their own voters through advanced gerrymandering, with dark money from outside groups flooding local races, and with Russian trolls infecting our information sources, what specific types of electoral reforms do you support?
I've been endorsed by End Citizens United, and I support everything that they're trying to achieve. I don't believe that corporations should be treated as people. I have said that I will not take any corporate PAC contributions, and I have not taken any corporate PAC contributions. I think that's a really important start. You need to do that in order to hold people's feet to the fire. For example, I mentioned wanting to negotiate drug prices. You cannot go up against Big Pharma if you're in their pocket. You have to be out of their pocket. So I would encourage all politicians to do the same as I've just done and support End Citizens United. I think that would be a great step forward.
We actually agree. I think Citizens United is an issue. I've seen it firsthand in my personal battles. There's something, on the federal side, we're limited to $2,700 per person, right, per cycle, limited to $5,400 for a couple, and then $5,000 for a PAC. That's pretty much how it works. What I found interesting when I first, last year, when I was running the 10 weeks I ran for governor and why I started to fight the system, is because states, we have unlimited money that can come into the state from outside sources. I don't know if you know this, somebody could cut me a $200,000 check if you're running for governor right now, and you can use that money. The federal is a little bit different. We cannot allow corporate interests to buy our votes. We just cannot allow that to happen. I think whatever we look at, if we're looking at any type of reform, we have to see how we can start to control that type of sort of unequivocal spending to candidates for issues that they only agree upon because they got hands in their pockets.
For Mr. Riggleman, students at this university and in schools throughout the nation are taught the values of respect and honesty. How can you square that obligation with the actions and behaviors of some national politicians today? In other words, here at a School of Leadership, how much does character matter in leadership?
Completely. And I don't have to square how other people act, I only have to square how I act. And if I go against somebody who I think is unethical, they're non-transparent, I think they're bought or paid for, it's something I'm going to fight. And again, I am here, I've never involved in politics. Politics got involved with me. And the thing is, when you do go into sort of battle for other people or for your own family, and you get behind a closed door, and you have a lobbyist pat you on the knee, and they say, hey, Denver, we know you're trying to change laws, but you didn't talk to us first. You didn't pass the bill through the lobbyist. And we're not confrontational, Denver, but we're going to kick your ass. That's a quote. Or they say, hey, Denver, we know you're right on this issue, but you didn't participate in the process. So for us, we know you're military. You understand what this means. You're just collateral damage. Integrity and character and fighting and what you do behind closed doors is more important than anything that I can imagine. And the fight that I've already engaged in and what I've done for others, and it's been on my own dime and my own time, is because I believe in what's right, and I believe in doing the right thing regardless of who's looking. There is nothing more important than character, and I think you see a dearth of that right now in our political system. And I believe we're going to need new candidates to sort of refresh, what is it, refresh? I just lost the quote. But I do think at some point we need new candidates to bring new blood into the Senate and into the House.
Ms. Cockburn.
Question again?
Students at this university and schools throughout the nation are taught the values of respect and honesty. How can you square that obligation with the actions and behavior of some national politicians today? In other words, here at a School of Leadership, how much does character matter in leadership?
Character matters. I think, I would ask though, having just heard what Denver said, you're taking money from the Koch brothers. Does that matter? And also some corporate money. Does that have an effect? I would say Yes, because those people will make demands on you once you're on Capitol Hill. I think that you can't ignore that. I think the Kochs are very powerful. I would not receive Koch money. Of course, they wouldn't offer it to me, but I certainly wouldn't take it. Yes, character matters. I think we have a crisis of character in Washington. I think everyone in this room knows that. I think we have a crisis of character in the White House. And this is affecting everything that is going on in Washington, and is of great concern when Republicans on the Hill behave in lockstep with a president who is, we have moral issues.
Our next question comes from Joe Crisp of Fluvanna County for Ms. Cockburn. Given the increasing burden of student debt and the negative impacts on our economy, what are some examples of legislation you would sponsor or support to reduce that burden and make college more accessible and more affordable to all students?
I think this is one of the biggest issues we face. Right now, there's legislation that I would support, and that is that interest rates can change. Any student should be able to change their interest rate and get the lowest rate that anyone who's getting a loan today gets. This affects a lot of students. I think that we need to make sure that for students going into the workforce, now that in Virginia, student debt is per person roughly $30,000. For some colleges like Averett, it's $35,000. Hampton-Sydney, I'm not sure what UVA is, but I'm sure someone in this room could tell me. But we need to make sure that there is money once you start working, that some of it should be tax deductible or should be not taxed at all so that you can pay loans back. Also, for those people willing to work in counties that are underserved, if you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're a nurse, anything useful for those counties, I would just get rid of your student loan. Right now, student loans are $1.5 trillion in this country. Wouldn't it have been great, rather than giving $1.9 trillion to corporations and the rich, to give it to students if we're going to hand out money? But that didn't happen. And we need to make sure that we take care of fraud in these educational institutions, not like UVA, but there are many educational institutions that have defrauded students.
Mr. Riggleman.
I'm not a big fan of handing out money, but I am a big fan of trying to fix the problem. I had about $30,000 in student loans myself here at UVA. I actually took out a Perkins loan, some grants and some other things like that, and I actually allowed my daughter to pay hers back also because they had to have some skin in the game. What I think is when you get the government involved with anything, you have an unlimited debt load. Right now, student loans are $1.48 trillion. Taxpayers footed over $100 billion in student loan debt defaults, so there's a problem. I think there needs to be some shared risk. A Perkins loan. I think at some point, all of us have to look at it, all loans going through Perkins, so there's shared risk between the universities and the government. We need to have access to money for students, but we can't allow the government to bankroll all of this in perpetuity based on the fact we're going to have a crash just like we had with the housing crash. If each student is averaging between $203 and $351 a month per payment, I mean, that is a really nice car. That's a great car payment. That's insurance. That's anything of that nature. So I think we need to do shared risk and actually run all loans through the Perkins program.
Next question on housing goes to Mr. Riggleman. It is from Mr. Jay Gould of Charlottesville and reads as follows. What can the federal government do to help municipalities tackle the growing affordable housing crisis? Close quote.
Goodness, that's great. I mean, I think for me, if I had anything to do, and I actually did this, is you have some things that are already available out there. If you're looking at Hub Zone, you're looking at 8A, you're looking at some things where you actually incentivize businesses to go into those areas if they have people from that area. I think what we do is we look at these business zones as hard as we can in these areas to make sure that we actually grow jobs and grow income so that we have people incentivized to go into these areas to actually do things. There are a lot of programs on the books right now if you go through HUD or anything of that nature, but I think the biggest thing for me, if we're going to have affordable housing, let's have the jobs to go with it. I think for me right now, I think it's actually utilizing the programs that we have on record. I think it's looking at tax-free zones and incentivizing those areas that might have some issues as far as getting people to come there to work, but it also goes back to something else. We're talking about infrastructure. We're talking about allowing infrastructure growth to happen in these areas. affordable housing, it's such a difficult thing because we have to have cost and demand. But for me, it's also been zoning issues in a lot of these areas. I think at some point we have to allow builders to build, and we have to look at some of the stuff that we can't really control, like controlling proffers and things of that nature, so we can actually build less housing based on the regulatory market that's destroying the construction industry when they're trying to do things in some of these areas.
Ms. Cockburn, rebuttal?
Charlottesville is way too expensive for most people to live in. There are many people who work here. There are a lot of jobs in Charlottesville, but they have to come from Buckingham, they have to come from Nelson, they come from Fluvanna. The issues raised by this are not just housing, it is transportation. There is a wonderful little bus company called Jaunt, which will carry you for a low price, but Jaunt needs federal dollars to extend their reach. They need to go further. Inside Charlottesville, the public housing wait list is full. We have people who cannot get housing. We need federal support, increased federal dollars for affordable housing. When you go around with groups like AHIP, who help people if you can't afford a water heater or you can't afford some kind of essential repair. I've been around with them in Charlottesville and in Albemarle, and I've been to houses where literally people they mark an X on the floor so the children will not fall through. We need to fix that.
Thank you very much. My final question I'm going to be putting to both of you and invites a fulsome response. And it's very honest. We appreciate the opportunity to ask you so many questions about public policy and leadership, but our time is necessarily short. What one additional question do you wish we had asked of you? And what one question do you wish we had asked of your opponent?
90 seconds.
We're going to give you a very generous 90 seconds each, and we're going to let you resolve it fairly.
Can we pass?
No, sir. Starting with Ms. Cockburn. What question do you wish we'd asked of you? And what one question do you wish we'd asked of your opponent?
That's a really hard question.
You asked
That's
a lot of
really
questions.
hard question.
You've asked a lot of questions here.
I think there's a big question that we haven't, I brought it up for a moment, but we haven't really talked about it, which is climate change. I think there are a lot of people who are concerned in this room about climate change, as I am. I think we need to look very carefully at the fact that the United States is the only country now that is not signed on to the Paris Accord. And I am delighted that there are states and businesses in this country who have refused to go along with that and who have acted on their own. We have huge climate change issues in the fifth. I mentioned the pipelines, I mentioned the methane. The Trump administration has just loosened restrictions on methane leakage. Methane is 25 times more powerful than CO2. These restrictions should not be loosened because we're all in serious danger because of that. I think that for me it's a top priority, and in terms of what I would want people to ask of my opponent, I'm going to let him choose something.
Thank you very much.
That was very
Mr.
nice.
Riggleman, you're recognized for 90 seconds.
So for me, I was surprised. I don't think we had a specific question about opioids tonight that I remember. And it was something that, based on, it's just some of the studying that I've done, I thought that opioids might come up based on what we've seen in the 5th District. There's a few things that just some stats that I want to go over that I think you guys might find pretty interesting. And boy, this was a tough one. Number one, if you look at, there's multiple border areas where we have opioids transshipments, but also China. And, you know, for me, when looking at counterintelligence and counterterrorism, I'm looking at, say, there's something called the Jihad of South, which is a joint interagency task force. And what they found, and I can't give you the exact numbers, is about 20 to 25% of drugs are interdicted, 20 to 25%, and they interdicted over 100 tons. So if you go down south at the opioids and synthetic opioids, you're getting across the border, right in the southern border, you're getting thousands of pounds and thousands of tons of drugs that are coming over. It's not just opioids, but also other stuff. But there's something else that's happening, and it's China. I don't know if you guys know this with opioids, but China is actually mailing opioids using cryptocurrencies into the country. So when you start looking at all these things that are going on with rehabilitation and law enforcement and things of that nature, there's something else we have to look at, is how do we stop the flow of these drugs from all these sieves that are coming into the country? So when looking at rehabilitation and things like that, I really thought somebody was going to ask me about marijuana as an exit drug. I really did. And the fact is, at this point, with the amount of addiction that we have, I think at some point we have to look at marijuana as an exit drug for these opioid abusers.
We've come to that time in the program where we'll be looking for your closing statements.
I had a question for Leslie. Did you have fun?
Your time was up. Ms. Cockburn, you're now recognized for your 2 minutes of closing statement.
Thank you. I'm going to start my closing statement by just continuing on that thought about opioids and accountability and what can be done on Capitol Hill. For me, when I look at opioids, I look at the pharmaceutical companies who pushed opioids. There have been excellent investigations on this so far. We need to have those investigations on Capitol Hill, in the same way that the state of New York and Montana are bringing those investigations to court. Let's bring that to Congress. Also, insurance companies who've made it much easier to get opioids than other drugs which are not so addictive. So we have problems right here at home. Accountability is a key thing for me. It's because of my background in journalism. Every story I ever did as a journalist had a piece in Washington, holding somebody's feet to the fire. Because when you do the kind of work I was doing, when you go into war zone after war zone after war zone, places where others do not want to go, to talk to people who don't have a voice, you realize that you need to speak truth to power no matter what the cost. It's what we call courage. Right now, we all need courage. It is a very tough business, politics. This right now, Charlottesville, this is the center of the universe. Things are happening here that I regard, having covered stories everywhere in the world, the most important thing going on in the world right now is right here. We are at the heart of the Trump wars. We are in a country that I believe is in danger of having our democracy slip away. I love history. I've studied many periods of American history. My family has been involved in important parts of American history, like World War I, where my grandfather earned his Silver Star by crossing the front line to clean out a machine gun nest in an extremely brave act. My father served in World War II. I think that we need service. We need to be involved and engaged, every single one of us, because for all of us, our grandchildren will ask, what were you doing in 2018? And I want to be one of the people who said, I stood up and I helped change the course of this country and bring our democracy back. Thank you very much.
Mr. Riggleman, you are now recognized for your closing statements, and with the generosity of our UVA students, it appears you each have 3 minutes, as Ms.
I saw that. I was really excited about that. Thank you. I know this comes off the website, fellow Wahoos, but it was something that I want to read before I start, and is this. Coming to the University of Virginia was a dream of mine, and there's a quote by Thomas Jefferson I want to read, and it's this. Educate and inform the whole mass of people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. The education that I got when we got back home, after 20 plus years on the road, whether military, supporting the National Security Agency, being overseas, doing counter ID work, all the things that I had to do, was that when we came home and we built our distillery, we found out really quick we got an education on how it really works. I despise politics. I hate it. I've been behind the door my whole life. I've been either fighting or I've been doing intelligence work. I've been with my daughters, my wife. For 11 years, they really didn't see me. And what you think when you come home, when you've served your country, that there's this free or there's this fair way of doing things. And when you walk into a state house or into a government house and you walk into an office of a delegate or you walk into the office of a senator or a representative, and when you're looking at these individuals and you're like, these guys aren't listening to me because somebody owns them. And it happened to me for 4 years by myself. I didn't get involved with politics. I would go knock on the door and walk in and say, why are you doing this? Why are these tax laws different, right? Why is your taxes 30 times more for this business than that business? And I kept getting the same thing. You have to play the game.